We're talking today with Mr. Anno Vander Kolk of Grand Rapids, Michigan, and the interviewer is James Smither of the Grand Valley State University Veterans History Project. Now, can you start us off with some background on yourself, and to begin with, where and when were you born?
I was born on a small 40-acre farm in Ottawa County on the Harlingen-Ottawa County border, and my parents were very poor, of course we had only a 40-acre farm, but it maintained during the Depression we always had plenty to eat.
Okay. So you were able to you owned the farm and you kept it?
No, we never owned the farm.
Oh, okay.
But the owner was smart. He always just took the interest. As long as we paid the interest, we could stay on the farm.
Mm-hmm.
So we never got the principal paid for until my grandparents both died and left an inheritance to my mother.
Okay. But in the meantime, you're able to stay on the farm and feed yourselves. Okay.
Yeah.
So what were you growing on the farm?
Well, we grew all crops, pigs, chickens, cows, and our main crop was, our cash crop was, of course, eggs and pork.
Okay.
And we had, of course, several cows that we used to use for sustenance, butchering. My uncles would come over in the fall and they'd butcher a cow and some pigs, and my aunts would come over, and in those days we didn't have refrigeration, so they would can it, put it in these 2-quart jars, and put them on the stove, and they were boiled and cured, and then we ate that all winter long.
Okay. Now, did you grow vegetables for yourself? Or
Oh yeah,
anything?
we had a garden and grew vegetables and stuff.
All right. And what sort of education did you have?
Well, I had grade school. I had to walk 2.5 miles, about 2.5 miles almost, and to school. And from kindergarten through 8th grade, I went to West Forest Grove School. And then after that, there was our doctor. He was one of these guys that played calls in the homes and stuff, and he told the coach of Zeeland High that there was a farm boy out there that he should have on his football team. And of course, all my brothers and sisters, and I had four brothers and one sister, and none of them went to high school, but I went to high school because the coach let me stay at his house doing menial jobs and stuff, and babysitting and so forth during football season, so that I could play football. And if it hadn't been for the football, I don't think I'd ever stayed in school.
Now, how far was the high school from your home?
About 9 miles.
Okay.
Zeeland. It was Zeeland.
New Zealand, yeah. And then when it was not the football season, how did you get to school? Or did you still live with the coach?
After that, there was a mechanic that lived in Gitchell, and his name was Mr. Gitchell. And he was a mechanic at the Ford Motor Company in Zeeland. And what would happen is my mother would get up at 5 o'clock in the morning, put the stove on and get my meal ready and wake me at 6. And at 7 o'clock I had to walk about 2 miles to the place where I could ride with him into Zeeland. And then at night it was the same thing going home. And of course, coming home, it was always later. And so my mother always had a warm meal for me in the oven when I got home.
Okay.
Yeah.
So, and did you do this then for 4 years?
Yes.
Okay.
Well, I did work. I had the second year, I rode with a group. I had to pay $1 a week. We had an old limousine, taxi limousine that we had, and there were Howard Smallman and his father had bought this car. So $1 a week, and we had 6 of us that would ride to school back and forth.
Okay.
And then the last year I had my own car. I had an old Dodge that I had bought after working in the summer, and I I took children to school and charged them $1.
All right. And then, so when did you graduate from high school?
1949. No,
39.
41.
Oh, before you graduated.
1941, I graduated from high school.
All right. And then what did you do after you graduated?
I went and enlisted at Hope College, and I had a job there staying with an economics teacher that lived in the south end of Holland. I used to have to exercise her dog and do menial jobs around the house. But then I joined the Knickerbocker fraternity, and she said I couldn't stay with her anymore. So
Okay.
that's when I got the job to work in a factory as a sander for a whole shift. And then I was taking about 12 hours of subjects, and I wasn't doing too well.
Okay. So were you working a night shift or?
Yeah, no, after school,
Okay.
the second shift.
Okay. So got a late afternoon into the evening kind of thing.
Right.
Yeah. Okay. All right. So that was a lot of work and not going to school. Okay. And of course that's 1941 now. So
Yeah.
Pearl Harbor happens. How did you learn about Pearl Harbor?
I was in the Knickerbocker fraternity in Holland, Michigan, at Hope College, and it was on the radio. And so the infamous speech that Roosevelt gave, and of course 4 of us drove to Grand Rapids the next Monday, and joined the Air Force.
All right. Now, before that happened, were you paying very much attention to the news? Were you aware of the war in Europe and that kind of thing?
It was in the background. It wasn't major in our lives.
So you weren't really expecting to get into the
we
service.
knew what was going on, but
But-
it was just, shall we say, background information.
It was somebody else's business and
Yeah.
not really your problem.
Yeah.
Okay. So, but all of a sudden now it is your problem. Now, what was it like when you went to the recruiting office? Were there a lot of guys there? What was going on?
Yeah. We joined up, and of course we went back. I don't know when the other fellows went in, but then I dropped out of school and got a job. And of course I, kept waiting for the call, but
Okay. So you went to the recruiting office, you signed up. Okay. Now, did you select the Army Air Corps at that time?
yeah,
Okay. And what did they tell you when you signed up? What was going to happen next?
they didn't say.
Okay.
So they didn't give us any definite information. So I waited for a while, and then I got a job. I used to work at Bond Aluminum, and I used to work at the Heinz Pickle Factory while I was waiting, and at Chris Craft. I also did those landing crafts that Chris
Okay.
Craft used to make. I used to put the bottom planks on those
All right.
while I was waiting to be called up.
All right. Now, did you ever try contacting a recruiter or anyone to find out why you weren't being called, or did you?
No.
Okay.
No news was good news.
All right.
I don't know if it was good news. I was anxious. We were anxious to go.
Okay. So at this point now, are you following the news of the war and paying attention to what's happening?
Yeah,
Okay.
of course.
All right. So when do you actually have to report for duty?
I reported, it was in January of 1943.
Okay. And where do you go first?
Grand Rapids, we got on the train. My uncle, on my goodbye dinner, my uncle prayed so long I almost missed the train. But anyhow, we went to Detroit, and then from Detroit we went to, got on a troop ship and went to Miami, Florida, where I took my basic training, learning to march and physical exercises and stuff.
Now, what kind of facility did they have there? Where were you staying? Where were you training?
Miami Beach, Florida. It was the Atlantic Towers Hotel
Okay.
that we stayed in, and of course on the way we had a problem because they fed us with these mess kits. And being the Vander Kolk, I got to the end of the line, And by that time, the water that they were rinsing in got oil on it and stuff in our mess kits, and we had to scoots when we got into the Atlantic Towers. And there was a big long line in front of the restroom because we hadn't been assigned rooms yet. And there was a line, and everybody was timed 1 minute. And then you had to go back to the end of the line. But anyhow, they were assigned, and then of course I took my basic training.
Okay. Now the hotel was a luxury hotel, but
Yeah.
but how was it? Did they kind of convert it for the service?
It was, no, they were all just military personnel there, Air Corps personnel.
But I mean, were you sleeping? Did you have all the hotel beds and furniture, or
Yeah.
was it now? So it wasn't Army furniture or
No.
anything like
No.
that? Okay.
No. And of course, that was my first encounter with Southerners, and of course, they tried to pull the rank on us. And being from Grand Rapids, we had 4 of us, big guys in this room. And they came in, they were going to haze us, and it was one slug, and it was all over. We meant business. We weren't going to, give in to their hazing.
Okay. And of course, these guys, I mean, they were just other recruits like you, right? They weren't
Yeah.
they weren't guys who'd been there a
Yeah.
long time or anything
Yeah.
like that. Okay, so they were just
Yeah.
making trouble for you. All right. So now, what did the training there consist of?
Basically, marching, physical training, and all physical, mostly physical.
Were they giving you any kind of tests at that time to figure
No.
out what to do with
No.
you? Okay.
No, and then after our basic training, we were there several months. That's where I got the worst sunburn of my life because I wasn't used to that hot southern sun.
Right.
I had a crust on my nose the whole time I was there, and then of course they shipped us from there. They sent us to college training detachments, and I went to Kent State University, and that's where we first got into actual training as far as pilot training was concerned. We got weather, we got hydraulics, and all kinds of courses that were pertinent to our flying and becoming pilots. Weather, and that's where we first flew. Just one time we went up in a Piper Cub just to see what they were testing us, just to see how we would react to various situations. But,
Okay. Now, were all of you people who wanted to be pilots, or were they going to have some of you be pilots and some be flight officers of other kinds, or?
yes, yeah, we all went through the same training all the way through.
All right.
Yeah.
Okay. So now, what was the purpose of a college training detachment? Why are they sending you to college at all?
Well, partly was an introduction and to see what our capabilities were. I'm sure I don't know, I just did what had to be done. But later on, I realized that all of it pertained to becoming a pilot. Because from there, I went to San Antonio SAC, it was called, San Antonio Aviation Training Center.
Right. Okay. And what happens there?
That's where you went through all of the tests and ability. They tested everything. I mean, your coordination, sight, you name it, color blindness, as well as physical training. And it was at that time that I was there that it was 112 degrees for over a week. And when we got through with our physical training on the field, there was a puddle of mud underneath us. Yeah, and never had a dry bit of clothes on our back the whole time for that time, a week and a half of 112 degree temperature.
Right. Okay. Now, so they sort you out, and at this point, then, but you qualified to train as a pilot, then.
Yes.
Okay. And once they determine that, now what happens to you?
Well, from there, they sent us to, after finishing San Antonio Aviation Training Center, they sent me to, senior moment,
Was it another field?
Oklahoma.
Okay.
I was just west of Oklahoma City. It was Cimmaron Field,
Okay.
Oklahoma. And it was a field out in the, way out in the country. And that's where we took our primary training, where we flew the PT-19, which was an inline open cockpit trainer.
Okay. Now, was that a monoplane or a biplane?
It was mono.
So yeah, just one set of wings, not two. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Was this the first time you've actually flown a plane, or did they let you try the Piper Cub when you were back at
Well,
Kent
when
State?
we were the only time before was the Piper Cub.
Right. But had you actually flown the Piper Cub yourself, or?
Oh yeah, they did. We did.
Okay.
Well, I don't know. I may have gone up more than one time because I can remember doing lazy eights over Ohio.
All right. But now you're down there and you're kind of doing the more serious training here, and yeah, when you're there, I mean, how long were you at Cimmaron Field? Do you think?
10 weeks.
Okay. And over the course of that time, were there people who washed out or had crashes?
Oh yeah. When you went there, it was starting the process of elimination, and of course, because there were other pilots that washed out, and then of course went into bombardiering and other activities along flight lines.
Okay. Now, were there any accidents there?
What?
Were there any accidents? Did any of the trainees crash? Or?
No, not that I can recall. There was only one time that one of the students hadn't fastened his seatbelt, and the instructor tipped the plane upside down, and he went out, and of course landed in a field. But in those days, you always had your parachute on. That was your cushion that you sat on, so everybody had a parachute on.
All right. And when you flew, did you only fly during the day, or did you do any night flying there?
No, that was just during the day. And the first time after I had soloed, I was told to go to another field, which was just a landing strip in Bethany, west of Oklahoma City, near Lake Overholt, and he told me to practice some landings and takeoffs. So the first time I went in for a landing on that field, my tail wheel hit a power line or a telephone line, and my plane just shrugged, and I just pushed the controls forward and took off before stalling out, and that would have been an accident.
Okay.
So I went around and I said, going right back on it, but this time the power line, remember.
Yeah.
So then I did several landings and then flew back over
Okay.
the main base.
All right. Now, so what is your next stage after that?
From there on, we went to basic training, which was in Garden City, Kansas. And that was during the winter, and I don't know if you've never been to Kansas, and most people haven't been. Mud was 3 or 4 inches deep, pot-bellied stoves, cold, miserable, and one morning I woke up, and it was a Sunday morning. I decided not to wake up for reveille. And it was but a few minutes later, there was a captain there. He said, "You're on report." Well, the rest of the time I was in Kansas City, I was walking a square at the headquarters, full dress with an army rifle, doing 40 tours. And I never did get to downtown Garden City. Every weekend I was walking 50 minutes out of the hour doing my service. And during that time I had decided that a quitter never wins and a winner never quits. And I was going to do whatever they demanded of me.
Okay, so you learned that lesson. What kind of plane were you training in now?
That was a BT-13.
Can you describe that?
Yeah, and that was it had a right radial engine, and it was about, a couple hundred, 250 horsepower probably aircraft. And the pilot, of course, the instructors took you up a few times, and then after he took me up a few times, he said, okay, you're going to solo today. And he said, I want you to be able to get lots of altitude. So I did some of the training things that he told me to do, and of course one of them was to stall the plane out. So I got up to 10,000 feet, and when I got up to 10,000 feet, I thought, see once what the plane is going to do, you know, to feel it out as to before it stalls and goes out. So I did that, found out when it was going to stall. And then what I did is I did do a spin, and that's where you kick the right rudder and stall the plane out, and it goes out and it twists down toward the earth. And you're supposed to come out of a spin, you have to kick the left rudder, count to 3, and pop the stick, and you pull out of the spin. Well, I didn't pull out of the spin, and here the ground is coming up to me. And so I went with the spin and did the exact same thing. Kicked the opposite rudder, and this time I hesitated just a little more. I didn't count, you know, fast. I counted so 1,001, 1,002, 1,003. Popped the stick, came out.
All right.
Second time
Okay.
that I feel that the Lord was with me. I did it, guardian angel.
Something. Well, that, and you managed to keep your cool in an emergency.
Oh yeah.
You know, and think yourself out of it too.
Yeah.
Okay, well, that's what they want in pilots.
See, and then we only did half. There was supposed to be 10 weeks of basic training.
Right.
Well, we only did half. Then the second half, we had advanced training. And at that time, we flew AT-11s, which is a twin engine. Because I was a big guy, most of the big guys flew bombers.
Okay, so you're too big to be a fighter pilot, basically.
Yeah.
Okay.
No, that would have been the first choice, but anyhow. So then we flew that AT-11, and that's where we first flew at night too. We had night flights there while we were training.
Okay. And what challenges were there to flying at night?
Getting the plane off and getting it down. Mostly getting it down, because all you had was 2 rows of lights, you know, and you had to have a basic concept of position. And that was when we really had the shall we say, the feeling that we were becoming real pilots. And so then we went to advanced. Well, and that was, the AT-11 was our really advanced training. But then after we filled that, I went to Brooksfield, Texas for my advanced training, and I flew B-25s there.
Okay.
That was the actual bomber.
All right. Now, how is a B-25 different to fly than the trainer?
Well, the B-25 was much, much bigger, had 2 Pratt Whitney's 2,000 horsepower. I mean, 2,000 horsepower engines. And that was big and heavy, and it was a far cry different. Yeah, the only incident that I had there is one time taxiing, I ran off the runway, and they had to pull the plane back on the runway. But when I was flying, there was a fellow from Grand Rapids that was in training with me most of the time, and his name was Kenny Sutter. And when we were there, he leveled that plane out 50 feet in the air, 50, 60 feet in the air, and I was his co-pilot, because that's the way we used to train, pilot and co-pilot. Well, I was a co-pilot that day, and he was leveling this thing out, getting it ready to stall, and I said, Ken, you're 50 feet in the air, and I just gave that throttle a boost, and away we went around the second time. to, you gotta fly the pattern, fly.
So what altitude should he have been at?
He should have been at the ground,
Right.
ready to have the wheels touch the ground
Okay.
before it stalled out. But anyhow, here we are, up there, yeah. And then the second incident was one that was a night flight that I had with him again. And we were supposed to leave from Brooksfield, Texas, go to Eagle Pass, Texas, which is the extreme west part of Texas, fly up to San Angelo, and then back to Brooksfield. Well, what happened is while we were going, I was a pilot that night, and he was a co-pilot, and I asked him to take a ground reading, and we had a tailwind, and so we were going very fast. We were going 265, 70 miles an hour. And I said, what city is that down there? And he said, that's Crystal City. Well, that happened to be Eagle Pass.
Oh,
And of course, our instructors told us to be sure to be at the altitude we were assigned, which was 10,000 feet, because you can fly at 10,000 feet without oxygen, see? So I made sure I was at 10,000 feet. But when I saw a whole bunch of lights on the horizon, I said, something's wrong here. And they said, when there's something wrong, do a 180. So I did a 180, and I could see the crags of that mountain below me. So anyhow, and in the meantime, the weather had come in, and there was no ground. We were supposed to go contact flight, which is called, by cities. And, well, there weren't, the clouds had covered it all up. So I had to go on for the first time. I had to go on instrument flying. And I brought that plane in, and you talk about having a guardian angel. He guided me all through that, because what you gotta do is there's two zones. One is a dida and the other is a dadit. And when you're flying, you keep diminishing the angle of your aircraft until you hear the solid sound of a hum, which is the DA and the NA together. And that's when you're on the beam. And I flew that into San Antonio, Texas. And of course, they gave me instructions. We were at 10,000 feet. We had to get down to the ground. So there was nobody else in the air. But anyhow, after we let down to a certain altitude, I don't remember what that was, but it flew into San Antonio, Texas. You had to turn after you went over the center of the beam, which was a blockout. You had to listen, you'd hear a hum, and then block out, and then the beam again. And at that time, you had to turn to a certain direction to get to Brooksfield. Well, anyhow, we did all that. He had to help me, but I had to fly. And when I broke out at 100 feet over Brooksfield, there was the runway right in front of me. If I hadn't been there, I wouldn't be here today.
wow. All right.
Yeah.
No, when you're on these bases, except for Garden City where you had to be on guard,
Yeah.
did you get to go into the towns, and what did you do when you were not training?
Most of the time I was writing letters and doing things. I never was one to, I went to, when I was in Oklahoma, I had Morrissey and Murphy. They were two of the fellows that were in primary training with me, and Bob Weeman. And we went into the city, and of course had a steak, because that was the thing to have when you were out west.
Yeah.
But I don't remember, only about once that I went into Oklahoma City.
Okay. What about in San Antonio when you were in Brooksfield?
There I did. I would go out, and in fact, Ann Sheridan, I ate at her home. She invited some of the pilots over on a Sunday, and that's where I first had my first Mexican meal, which was in a corn husk,
Yeah, like a tamale or whatever.
what is it, tamale?
Tamale, yeah.
Tamale. But anyhow.
So Ann
I
Sheridan, the actress?
Huh?
Ann Sheridan, as in the actress?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah, yeah. So, but anyhow, then after that, of course, then we graduated and got our wings and our commissions.
All
Then
right.
we came home.
All right. So when did that happen? When did you get your commission?
It was in June of 1944.
Okay. All right. So now you get to go home for a little bit. And now what happens to you?
Well, then I got a telegram to go to Liberal, Kansas to fly boxcars, which was a B-24, referred to as a boxcar. Then they sent me the telegram, go to, after I was there, I flew one time to get my flying time in for 4 hours. Then they sent me from there, orders to go to Del Rio, Texas, where I took my transitional training in B-26s. And the night I flew in to Del Rio, there was a big flash of fire on the end of the runway. Well, you know what happens with a B-26. When you lose an engine, it can't fly. And it had gone in and burned up, crashed. But all that time, I enjoyed flying the B-26 because it was the fastest bomber that they had.
Okay. So how was flying a B-26 different from a B-25?
Heavier and faster. Heavier and faster. Yeah, we landed it at 105 miles an hour, stalled out at probably 110. No, 1.5. We brought it in at 1.5, and that's what we landed it at.
Okay. All right. And how long did you train on the B-26s?
Well, now that I was there, that was until about, since we were on the fast track, that was until about 1945. That's when the war ended. See, and that's when things came to a more or less halt. But that's when the things started slowing up. They didn't need to. What had happened is, because we were on the fast track, because they were losing so many pilots flying into the Palestine oil fields, from France and from Italy, that they were losing so many pilots that we had to go on a fast track. We were, vulnerable. So then all of a sudden they knocked out the Palestine oil fields, and that was the end of the war. Hitler's war machine grew to a halt.
Yeah, and the casualties of bomber pilots went down a lot after they had good escorts too. So they weren't losing as many over Germany. Either.
No.
And eventually I think the Russians probably got to Ploesti at some point, but yeah. So basically so for a while there, they were trying to get as many pilots as possible, and you were part of that, but then they changed their minds.
Yeah, then it was over. See, they had knocked out the Ploesti oil field. So that's when my buddy, Bob Weeman, who is in St. Paul, Minnesota now, we still contract each other. And he went to A-26 training, and we all wanted to do that, but I didn't. I sat around, and then they sent me to Laredo, Texas, where I got my second set of wings.
Okay, explain that.
Yeah, that was a observer school. It's called Observer's Wings.
Okay, and what does that involve?
That involved all gunnery. That involved all military aircraft gunnery, where I could take a 50 caliber machine gun, blindfolded, take it apart and put it back together.
All right.
And of course, after that, I was sent down to Harlingen, Texas, where I flew B-26s again, towing targets for actually fighter pilots and for gunnery students to shoot at. And it was a sock that we towed, but they had plastic bullets, but every once in a while some stupid guy would shoot at us at the playground, but they were plastic bullets.
Mm-hmm.
But I flew out. We used to fly out over the Gulf and then come on back to Harlingen, Texas.
Mm-hmm. So how long did you do that?
Oh, I did that until the winter of '45,
Mm-hmm.
when I was officer of the day at Harlingen, Texas, Harlingen Air Force, Texas. I was officer of the day in case any big ranking person came onto the field. We had to grade them and so forth.
Mm-hmm.
So I had drawn this officer of the day program, and four of my buddies that I used to fly with, we were all close, went up, and we always liked to fly formation, see. So they went up, flew formation, and out over the Gulf, something happened. We don't know what, but they all went down and crashed. And I had to take one of my buddies home to Brooklyn. He was a flight officer, Bill Knapp. And I had to take him home to Brooklyn that winter, and it was cold and miserable. And of course, we had to give them a military funeral, you know, whatever. But he was a Jewish fellow, and so they didn't want a lot of folderol about it. So, but after the funeral, we came in, and I had never drunk in my life, and they had this Hennessy cognac. And I watched everybody, you know, and so I did, and I almost died the second again because I couldn't get my breath because of the cognac.
Yeah.
But anyhow, yeah. And then of course it was just a matter of waiting around, and after I was went back to Harlingen. Then after flying there for a while, they sent me to Gulfport, Mississippi, Air Force Airfield there. And one time I flew a B-25 to Jackson, Louisiana. And I had to get back, and to get back to my field in Gulfport, I had to take the Intercoastal Canal on a barge back to Gulfport, Mississippi. But yeah, and then I waited there. I did some flying there. One time there were a couple of fellows from the office that wanted to go to, I don't know, some city in Hattiesburg, Mississippi.
Okay.
And so I said, I'll take it. But I went to the flight line and didn't have any planes available except an L5, which hadn't been tested, you know. So I said, well, I'll do the testing. So I took it up, did whatever had to be done, and took it back down, and we got off and went there, and then came. Then on the way back, this was on a weekend, and on a Sunday, after I took off, the weather closed in on me. It was supposed to be contact flight back to Gulfport. Well, I'll tell you, I saw more trees in that Louisiana swamp than you can shake a stick at, and I had visions of snakes and everything else. But I had gotten down so low that I had to fly the river bend and back in, and I said, that's it until the weather is right for flight. We're going to stay here. And then from there on, I was just. Well, there was another story there. When I was there, I was ready to be discharged. And the colonel that was there, or major, is there anything else? This is the last stage, about to be mustered out. And I said, yeah, they always told me that I had bad tonsils and I couldn't have them taken care of while I was on flight duty. I said, no, I'd like to have those taken care of. So he got kind of rough. He said, write orders for this man to report directly to the hospital. So what I had on, the clothes I had on, I had to go to the hospital. They took out my tonsils. Well, when I woke up, I had crusted blood. All my hair was solid blood. And at that time, And while I was having the surgery, I kept seeing a white light, and they had banged an instrument or something, and that went out and back in and out and back in, and it kept getting louder and louder and louder. And then finally I came to, and I was in bed with this crusted blood. I almost died from the hemorrhaging, I think. But anyhow, I lived. The Lord, again, was merciful, and He had something more for me to do.
But they hadn't cleaned you up.
Huh?
But they hadn't cleaned you up?
No.
Oh,
No.
that's kind of strange.
And they stole all my clothes at that time. All I had after that was the clothes I had on my back until I got out. All my wings, everything. I didn't have any of it.
All right. Did you ever get any of that replaced?
No,
Okay.
never.
All right. So when do you then get out of the service?
Well, then, see, another thing is when they were going to do that surgery, when they were going to muster me out, it was October. And then I thought, well, gee, school doesn't start until January. I said, what am I going to do in that meantime? See, so when I had that work done, they said, we can't guarantee you when we're going to get you, muster you out again. And I said, it doesn't matter. So anyhow, I got discharged in December, and my leave that they granted me at the end of my service term was up in January, and I registered at Michigan State. But while I was waiting, I went to Hope College where I'd been before, and all the fellows were coming back. So I canceled Michigan State's enrollment, and I went back to Hope College, and that's where I finished up getting my AB degree.
Okay. Now, did you get to use any of the credit from Kent State toward that degree,
No.
or that?
Well, they gave you a blanket. I think something like 12 hours. Of credit.
So a little bit, one semester sort of thing.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. And then once you got out, what did you do?
I went to Hope College.
Yeah, but after Hope College, when you graduated.
And I went to one year to summer school, but I worked most of my way through college.
Right.
I saved my GI Bill. By the way, that Roosevelt was smart because he did more for this country financially, because all of the men that had GI Bills went on and got extra degrees. And when I applied at the end of my term at Hope College in 1949, for every medical position in the country, there were 500 applicants. And me, with my B average, I didn't fare. So I graduated from Hope College, and I went to the University of Michigan postgraduate, working towards a degree in science towards teaching. So I have 12 hours now towards a master's degree in teaching that I got from Michigan, but I never finished because I applied for dental school and was accepted, and that's when I became a dentist.
Okay.
And I had all my GI Bill because during the college years I always worked for my tuition, worked my way through, worked at pickle factory, I worked at General Motors, night shifts and what have you, saved all my GI Bill and went all the way through dental school on my GI Bill.
Very good.
I had to buy back 1 month of leave that I had taken. I had to buy it back. But otherwise, all of my dental career was paid for by my GI Bill.
And then did you practice in Grand Rapids or somewhere else?
Came to Grand Rapids, practiced in Grand Rapids for the 47 years.
All right.
And in 1902, I retired because my wife had Parkinson's, and she wanted to move back to the west side to her homestead. So I retired after 47 years. I didn't get into 50, but anyhow.
Okay. Now, aside from the GI Bill money, when you look back at the time that you spent in the service, what do you think you took out of that, or what did you learn from it?
What?
Well, what do you think you took out of your military experience, or what did you learn from it?
Well, I actually think I learned who I was and what was expected of me. And like I said, when I was down in basic training, I said a quitter never wins and a winner never quits. And so it's been sort of, well, you find yourself and you know what you have to do and you do what you have to do when you have to do it.
All right. Well, it makes for a good
And of course, the Lord has guided me all these years. I gave my heart to the Lord when I was 8 years old by an old tree on the way to school because my father was an alcoholic and I used to go to church with my mother, and on the way to school I bowed by that great big old, it was a maple tree, and I said, Lord, I don't want to be like my father because he cursed and was alcohol and beat my mother and stuff. And so I said, I don't want to be like my father. I want to give you my life. And so ever since that, he has guided me, and I'm 95 and 4.5, and I still trust him. He's
with
been
good
good
reason.
to me all these years, and I think I've learned that I can trust him with the rest of my life.
All right. Well, it makes for a good story, so thank you very much for sharing it today. All right.